What does social mapping mean to me? It's a means of identifying our members and reflecting them in our leadership.
Social mapping really opened the door for the equity committees to actually have a voice. It really showed OPSEU that change needed to happen. One of the main things that has really happened within OPSEU is the education on equity issues. Many of the equity-seeking groups now have their own conference, and that conference has opened the door for OPSEU members to understand where those of us from the equity-seeking groups are coming from, where our past is, and what things they need to learn to help us to be a better ally. A lot of the social mapping really did show that OPSEU needed to open up those doors and allow equity to have a voice. And in changing a lot of the policies, it really did remove a lot of the barriers that we were facing in order to even participate. Social mapping also allowed the equity groups to actually do more work together, and you actually see that when you see the resolutions and constitutional amendments that have been coming forward from the equity groups. We're teaching each other how to get our issues forward and how to get things passed and to actually make change within OPSEU.
Le projet cartographie sociale est dans sa 10e année. C'est un outil qui adresse à reconnaître pas seulement les barrières, mais aussi les succès du CEFPO envers les besoins des groupes d'équité. Le CEFPO fait des gros efforts pour communiquer dans les 2 langues officielles.
The social mapping project for me has had several positive contributions to OPSEU. In the first place, for OPSEU to adequately and properly address its members' needs, it has to know who makes up its membership. Without knowing that, you can't adequately address your members' needs. From the local point of view, once I was able to physically map out my membership and realize that I had certain pockets of groups here and different pockets of groups in other areas, I realized that I needed to address needs that I was lacking in the local executive. So that further enabled me to reach out to specific people to fill certain holes that I didn't previously realize existed in the local. I've seen the social mapping project positively impact the equity committees and caucuses in a number of ways. Probably the most important is that I've seen the resolutions that have been submitted to convention over the last number of years have been directly tied to the recommendations that came out of the social mapping project. And more specifically, on the Young Workers Committee, we've seen our annual conference grow from 60 participants a number of years ago to up near 200 today. So the reason for that growth goes right back to the social mapping recommendations.
I think one of the biggest things for me is we see across the province and across our country and the world, in fact, that we're trying to identify barriers and ways that we can be inclusive. And although we have those communications, we don't often see the results of that. And what does that look like? What does inclusivity look like, and what does it actually look like to work towards that? And for me, being on the social mapping committee means that not only are we identifying issues, but we're taking proactive steps and actively working towards being inclusive and removing barriers. And that has been so enlightening for me, and it's been really warming to my heart. And one of the examples I can give about being proactive and seeing a tangible result is a Joint Leadership Day. OPSEU's had the Joint Leadership Day in the past, and now it's going to be an annual event. And seeing those results come to fruition really have put the social mapping project and social mapping committee in a very real context for me, and that's been a great thing to be a part of.
OPSEU is a very progressive union with all of its work it's done with the social mapping project. When we did the survey years ago and it had all of the recommendations that came out of them, OPSEU has really shown itself as a leader in this province and in the country. We need to see who's at the table. We need to see who's not. What is the membership of OPSEU and who is there and who isn't? All of the recommendations help to break the barriers in order to have full participation. That will make the union stronger in the future and will also make it fair for everyone to be able to participate. On a personal level, social mapping has helped me in more ways than I would be able to count. One of the examples, though, is with my increased childcare costs. There's no way I would be able to fully participate in this union if I didn't have social mapping and OPSEU helping to address this barrier.
I've seen the progressive action that OPSEU has taken through social mapping. For example, the board passed a very important resolution which will promote awareness about sexual and domestic violence by launching an educational program that will empower the members and the community to recognize and respond to domestic and gender-based violence, and by proposing model bargaining language for workplace programs and processes that address sexual and domestic violence.
Social mapping at first was a huge learning curve for me to understand its purpose and full objective. It has given equity a voice to help shape change within our union by removing barriers to inclusion for full participation to all its members. Many barriers have been raised, some have been resolved, others work continues on them. As a member of the Disability Rights Caucus, we have seen progression in many of these areas. At convention and other OPSEU events, large print, closed captioning on the screen, members requesting an accommodation through the equity unit. This year, the convention moving to a larger space. This will definitely help to remove barriers for many of the members, both visible and non-visible barriers. The resolution which the DRC is presenting at convention this year will further move us along the path to making our union stronger and inclusive for all. Personally, I think social mapping also helps to remind us treating everyone the same is not treating everyone equally.
What social mapping mean to me? It means to me that my union is progressive and that it is willing to change. As the original mover of social mapping, it took us 5 years to pass the resolution. We are now in our 10th year of implementing social mapping, as well as starting our second survey. This tells me that our union is willing to change. Although change has been slow, it is coming. And therefore, other resolutions, such as the equity seats, are passable. Even though it's been 3-4 years since it's been a resolution that's been defeated at convention, it is my understanding that OPSEU will eventually pass this. And it gives me great pleasure to be a part of this great union of OPSEU.